On Mother's Day, I received a card and my daughter made me read it out loud. Roses are red, violets are blue. You're a heavy burden, no one wants you here. Everyone laughed at me. My name is Grace. I'm 74 years old, and that was the worst humiliation of my life. It was Sunday morning. The sun was streaming through the living room windows when I arrived at my daughter Danielle's house to celebrate my day. I was wearing my favorite green dress, the one that always made me feel elegant. I had brought fresh flowers and sweet treats for my grandkids. "Grandma Grace!" the little ones shouted, running toward me. Their hugs filled my heart with joy. For a moment, everything seemed perfect. Michael, my son-in-law, barely greeted me with a quick, dry nod. Danielle came out of the kitchen with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mom, so glad you made it. We have a special surprise for you." I sat on the sofa surrounded by my family. The grandkids settled at my feet, full of anticipation. Danielle pulled a pink card from her purse and handed it to me. "It's from all of us, Mom. Read it out loud so everyone can hear." My hands trembled slightly as I opened the envelope. The card had little flower drawings the kids had made. How sweet, I thought. I started to read in a clear, excited voice. "Roses are red, violets are—" My voice cracked. The next words hit me like punches. "You're a heavy burden. No one wants you here. Your time has passed. It's time for you to go. Signed, your family who can't stand you anymore." The silence was deafening for 3 eternal seconds. Then Michael started to laugh, a cruel, mocking laugh. Danielle covered her mouth, but I could see she was laughing too. Even the kids, not fully understanding, started to giggle because the adults were. "Did you see your face, Mom?" Danielle said between laughs. "You should have seen yourself, Michael. Did you get a picture?" My heart shattered. Tears began to roll down my wrinkled cheeks. The card fell from my trembling hands to the floor. "It's just a joke, Mom," Danielle continued, but there wasn't an ounce of remorse in her voice. "Don't take it so seriously. You've always been so dramatic." Michael walked over and picked up the card from the floor. "Yeah, Grace, we were just playing around. But you know," he paused uncomfortably, "lately you've been a bit too present. Maybe you should consider other options." "Other options?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Well, you know," Danielle said, sitting in front of me, "there are some really good senior living communities for people your age, places where you can be with people like you. You'd be more comfortable." The word senior living rang in my head like a death sentence. My own children wanted to get rid of me like I was old junk. But I thought, my voice was barely a whisper, I thought I was coming to celebrate Mother's Day with you. "And you are, Mom," Michael interjected in a condescending tone. "It's just time to be realistic. You're not young anymore. You need special care, and we have our own lives." The grandkids looked at me, confused. The oldest, barely 8 years old, came over and took my hand. "Grandma, why are you crying?" Before I could answer, Danielle pulled him away. "Come here, son. Grandma's fine. She's just being sentimental." I sat there, feeling more alone than I had ever felt in my life. On the day that was supposed to celebrate my motherhood, my own daughter had publicly humiliated me, turning me into the family's cruel joke. I slowly got up, my legs shaking. I should just go. "Okay, Mom." Danielle didn't even stand up to say goodbye. "We'll call you later." I walked to the door with what dignity I had left, but inside my world had completely fallen apart. That night, in my empty house, I cried until there were no more tears. But something had changed in me. The humiliation had woken up something that had been dormant for years. It was time for my family to learn the truth about who Grace really was. The next day, I blocked all of them. But first, I needed to remember how I had arrived at such a painful moment. I sat in my favorite armchair, the same one where I had nursed Danielle 45 years ago, and let the memories flow like a movie in my mind. It all started when I was 29 years old. Danielle's father abandoned us when she was only 3. One morning, he simply wasn't there. He left a note on the kitchen table. "I can't do this life. I'm sorry." He didn't even say goodbye to his daughter. I remember that night, holding Danielle as she cried, asking for her dad. "Daddy had to go far away, my love," I whispered, promising myself that she would never go without anything. And I kept that promise. I worked double shifts at the textile mill for 15 years. My hands were full of calluses from sewing uniforms late into the night. Every extra cent I saved for Danielle's education. When she was 17 and wanted to study nursing, I sold my mother's jewelry. It was the only valuable thing I owned. But I saw the bright eyes of my daughter talking about her dream, and I didn't hesitate for a second. "Mommy, are you sure?" she asked me that day. "Completely sure, my love. Your education is the most important thing." During her 5 years of university, I worked weekends cleaning offices. I would come home with a wrecked back. But when I saw Danielle studying at the dining room table, it was all worth it. The day of her graduation, I cried with pride. "We did it, Mommy," she said, hugging me tight. "This wouldn't have been possible without you." Later, she met Michael. At first, I liked him. He was polite, hardworking, and seemed to genuinely love her. When they got married, I paid half of the wedding. It was $12,000 that I had saved for years, but I wanted my daughter to have the wedding of her dreams. "Mom, this is too much," Danielle protested when I handed her the check. "Nonsense," I said, smiling. "It's the most important day of your life. You deserve it." When they bought their first home, I gave them the down payment, $25,000. It was all I had saved, but seeing them happy in their new home filled me with satisfaction. Then the grandkids arrived, 2 beautiful little ones who became the light of my life. When Danielle returned to work after her maternity leave, I became their free babysitter. Every day for 3 years, I walked 6 blocks to their house at 6 in the morning. I made the kids breakfast, dressed them, took them to the park, fed them, bathed them, and read them stories. When Danielle came home from work, the house was clean and the children were happy. "I don't know what we'd do without you, Mom," Danielle used to tell me in those days. "You're an angel." But gradually, something changed. The thank yous became less frequent. My opinions about the children started to be considered as interference. When I suggested that the youngest needed to see the pediatrician for his persistent cough, Michael told me, "Grace, we're the parents here." The first time they spoke to me like that, I stayed quiet. I thought maybe I had been too nosy. Then the subtle comments started. "Mom, you don't have the energy you used to for watching the kids." "Grace, I think you got the kids' vitamins confused again. Maybe you should rest more at home." But I kept going every day. I kept helping. I kept giving my all. 2 years ago, when Michael lost his job, I started giving them $500 a month so they wouldn't lose the house. "It's just temporary," they said, "just until Michael finds something better." Michael found a new job 6 months later, but they never told me to stop sending the money. They just kept receiving it as if it were their right. When the kids needed new computers for school, I paid $2,000 without being asked. When Danielle's car broke down, I gave them $4,000 for the repairs. When they wanted to remodel the kitchen, I contributed $8,000. Little by little, I became the silent provider, the one who was always there to solve their financial problems, but who was no longer invited to important family decisions. A year ago, Danielle organized a family dinner for Michael's birthday. I found out by chance when one of my grandkids mentioned the secret party they had. "Why didn't you invite me?" I asked Danielle over the phone. "Oh, Mom, it was a really small thing, just the 4 of us. We thought you'd be bored." But I saw the photos on social media. There were 20 people, Michael's relatives whom I knew well. Everyone had been invited, except me. That night, I cried in silence, but I told myself it must have been an oversight. Oversights became a routine. They forgot to call me on my birthday. They canceled our lunch dates. When I showed up unannounced, they always seemed annoyed by the interruption. But the final straw came 3 months ago. I was at their house helping with dinner when I overheard Michael talking on the phone on the patio. "Yeah, my mother-in-law lives alone. She's getting really dependent. No, she's not sick, but you know how they are at that age. Yes, we're looking at options to move her to a proper place." I froze behind the door. My own son-in-law was planning to get rid of me like I was old furniture. That night, I couldn't sleep. I had given my whole life, all my money, all my love to this family, and now I was just an obstacle they wanted to get rid of. But they didn't know something very important about me, something I had kept secret for decades. My mother, before she died, had told me about a family property in Nassau, Bahamas, that I inherited when I turned 70. It was a beachfront condo that had been rented out for decades. The money had been accumulating in an account I never touched. I also had investments I made with the inheritance from my Aunt Lucille, who died childless and left everything to me. Bonds, stocks, certificates of deposit, money that grew quietly while I lived on my modest Social Security check. In total, I had almost $400,000 that my family knew nothing about. They thought I was a poor old woman living on government handouts. They didn't know I had been discreetly funding their comfortable life for years, not out of need, but out of love. But after the humiliation of Mother's Day, something inside me broke forever. It was time for them to learn Grace's true value. That cruel card was my wake-up call. I stayed up all night on Mother's Day, holding that card in my trembling hands. The words kept echoing in my head. "You're a heavy burden. No one wants you here." But as the tears dried on my cheeks, something strange started to happen. The sadness transformed into something more powerful: clarity, determination. For the first time in decades, I saw my situation with complete honesty. I wasn't a burden. I was the one keeping them afloat. I slowly got up and went to my bedroom. I took a wooden box from my dresser that I hadn't opened in months. Inside were all my important documents: bank statements, deeds, investment certificates. As I looked through the papers, I did some mental calculations that took my breath away. In the last 5 years, I had given Danielle and Michael exactly $67,000. $67,000 that they received as if it were their natural right, while they treated me worse and worse. The down payment on their house, $25,000. The wedding, $12,000. Monthly help for 2 years, $12,000. The kids' computers, $2,000. The car repair, $4,000. The kitchen remodel, $8,000. And hundreds of small expenses that added up to $4,000 more. Meanwhile, I was still living in the same modest house, wearing the same green dress on Sundays, walking to the grocery store to save on gas. But that wasn't what hurt the most. What really broke my heart was remembering how their treatment of me had changed. I remembered my oldest grandson's birthday 6 months ago. I had arrived early to help decorate, as I always did, but when I knocked on the door, Michael opened it with a look of annoyance. "Grace, the party doesn't start until 3. Why are you so early?" "I thought I could help with the preparations," I said with a smile. "We don't need any help. Danielle has everything under control." Behind him, I saw his mother, Brenda, hanging balloons in the living room. She had been invited to help. I was treated like an unwelcome guest. "I can wait outside until 3, I mumbled, feeling humiliated. "Don't be dramatic, Mom," Danielle said, appearing from the kitchen, wiping her hands on an apron. "You can stay, but don't get in the kitchen. You know you get confused with recipes." I got confused with recipes? Me, who had cooked for that family for decades? That day, I sat in a corner of the patio like a stranger at my own grandson's party. I watched as Brenda helped with the food, as the other guests complimented her on the cake she had baked. Meanwhile, I, who had paid for half the expenses of that party, was completely ignored. When it was time to sing Happy Birthday, I stayed in the back while everyone formed a circle around my grandson. No one noticed I wasn't in the family photos. Later that night, my grandson came up to me as I was discreetly picking up some dirty plates. "Grandma, why were you so quiet today?" "I was just tired, my love," I lied. "Grandma Brenda says you're too old for big parties." The boy's words cut through me like knives. Brenda, who was only 3 years younger than me, was telling my own grandkids that I was too old. But even after that humiliation, I kept giving them money, kept helping, kept hoping things would get better. How foolish I had been. I also remembered last Christmas. I had bought expensive gifts for everyone. A new bicycle for the oldest grandson, a tablet for the youngest, French perfume for Danielle, a power tool Michael had mentioned wanting. I spent almost $3,000 on those presents. On Christmas Eve, I arrived with my hands full of beautifully wrapped packages. The kids ran to me, excited, but Danielle quickly called them over. "Kids, put Grandma's presents under the tree with the others. We'll open them all together tomorrow." My gifts got lost among the mountain of packages they had bought themselves. When it was time to open them, no one mentioned who had given what. The kids vaguely thanked everyone for their gifts, but the most painful part came afterward. I had also brought a special gift for Danielle, a pearl necklace that had belonged to my grandmother. It was an antique piece, valuable and full of family history. "Mom, it's really pretty," Danielle said without even trying it on. "But you know I don't wear a lot of jewelry. Maybe you should save it for when the grandkids are older." She handed the box back to me without even opening the clasp to see the pearls up close. I had imagined that moment for months, thinking about how my daughter would look wearing the same pearls that had adorned 3 generations of women in our family. That night, in my empty house, I cried, hugging the little pearl box. It wasn't the monetary value that hurt. It was the total indifference to something that came from my heart. But the final straw came 2 months ago when I got the flu. I was in bed for a week with a fever of about 102 degrees. I couldn't cook, could barely get up to go to the bathroom. I called Danielle to ask if she could bring me something to eat, or at least ask how I was doing. "Oh, Mom, we're so busy right now. Michael has a big project at work, and I'm on a double shift at the hospital. Can't you ask a neighbor?" "But honey, I can barely walk." "Mom, you're not a little girl anymore. You have to learn to take care of yourself. We can't come running every time you get a cold." A cold. I had a high fever, and she called it a cold. She hung up and didn't call back all week. It was Mrs. Johnson, my 82-year-old neighbor, who brought me homemade soup and made sure I took my medication. A woman I barely knew showed more concern for me than my own daughter. When I finally recovered and returned to my routine of visiting my family, no one asked how I had been. It was as if that terrible week had never happened. And now, sitting with those bank documents in front of me, I understood with painful clarity what my real place was in my family's life. I wasn't the beloved grandmother. I was the emotional ATM. When they needed money, there was Grace. When they needed a free babysitter, there was Grace. When they needed a scapegoat for their frustrations, there was Grace. But when Grace needed love, care, respect, or simply a phone call during an illness, Grace didn't exist. That night, I made the hardest decision of my life. I took out my old laptop and logged into my online banking for the first time in months. I had to make some important changes. First, I canceled the automatic $500 monthly transfer to Danielle's account. Second, I closed the joint savings account we had opened for family emergencies, which only they used. Third, I changed my will. Everything I had designated for Danielle and Michael would now go to a foundation for abandoned seniors. And fourth, I did something I never thought I would do. I bought a plane ticket. It was time to see that property in Nassau I had inherited. It was time to start the life I deserved. But before I left, I was going to make sure my family understood exactly what they had lost. It was Tuesday morning when I executed my plan. I had slept for only 3 hours, but for the first time in years, I felt completely awake, completely determined. I got dressed in my most elegant gray suit, the one I had bought for Danielle's university graduation, but had barely worn. I carefully applied my makeup and styled my hair into a sophisticated bun. I wanted to look like the powerful woman I really was, not the needy old lady they thought I was. First, I went to the bank. My financial advisor, Mr. Henderson, was surprised to see me so early. "Mrs. Grace, how can I help you today?" "I need to make several important changes to my accounts," I said, in a firm voice. Over the next 2 hours, I completely reorganized my finances. I canceled all the automatic transfers to Danielle's accounts. I closed the joint account we had opened 3 years ago. I transferred money from my investments to my main checking account. "Are you sure about these changes, ma'am?" Mr. Henderson asked, clearly worried. "These are very big moves." Completely sure. It's my money, and I can do what I want with it. Then I went to my lawyer's office, Mr. Franklin, who had handled my family's legal affairs for decades. I need to completely change my will, I announced without preamble. Mr. Franklin, an older man who had known me since Danielle was a child, took off his glasses and looked at me with concern. Grace, is everything okay? This is a very drastic change. Everything is perfectly fine. For the first time in years, I see things with total clarity. I explained exactly what I wanted. Everything I had designated for Danielle and Michael would now go to a foundation for homeless seniors. I also established a trust for my grandkids that they could only access when they turned 25, and only if they maintained genuine contact with me, not out of family obligation. Grace, don't you think you should think about it for a few more days? These decisions are irreversible. I've had 74 years to think about it, Mr. Franklin, and the last 5 years have taught me everything I needed to know. I signed the documents with a steady hand. There was no shaking, no doubt. My next stop was the travel agency. I had researched my property in Nassau all night. It was a 3-bedroom condo in a beautiful neighborhood. It had been rented for years by a property management company, generating income that was accumulating in a Bahamian account I had never touched. I want to fly to Nassau this Friday, I told the travel agent. Is it a tourist trip, ma'am? No, it's a liberation trip. I bought a first-class ticket. If I was going to start my new life, I would do it in style. But before I left, I had to do one more thing. I had to write the letters. I got home at noon and sat down at my desk. I took out elegant letterhead I had bought years ago but never used. It was time to explain to my family exactly what had happened. The first letter was for Danielle. My dearest daughter, by the time you read this letter, I will be on my way to Nassau, where I will live in the property I inherited from my family that you didn't know existed. I have made the decision to cut all financial support I have been giving you for the past few years. The $500 a month you received has been permanently canceled. The joint account you used for emergencies has been closed. Don't take this as a punishment, but as a lesson in independence that I should have taught you a long time ago. For decades, I gave you everything I had. My time, my money, my energy, my unconditional love. But at some point, you decided that I was a burden instead of a blessing. The Mother's Day card was simply the last straw. But the problem started much earlier, when you stopped seeing me as your mother and started seeing me as your personal maid and private bank. I have changed my will. My inheritance will now be given to people who truly value generosity and family love. Your children will have access to a trust when they turn 25, but only if they prove they can maintain a genuine relationship with me. Do not look for me for money. Do not call me to ask me to come back. Do not send the grandkids to emotionally manipulate me. If you really want to get your mother back, you're going to have to prove that you value me for who I am, not for what I can give you. Your mother, who has finally learned to value herself, Grace. The second letter was for Michael. Michael, I never saw you as just my son-in-law. I accepted you as the son I never had, but you turned me into the awkward mother-in-law you wanted to get rid of. I heard your phone conversation 3 months ago when you were talking about finding a proper place to move me, as if I were old furniture getting in the way. What you didn't know is that a proper place was always in my hands. I have a property in Nassau, investments that generate more money than you make in a year, and the financial freedom to live wherever and however I choose. For years, I quietly funded your comfortable lifestyle. I paid for repairs, helped with expenses, covered emergencies. I did it out of love, not obligation. But you interpreted my generosity as weakness, my availability as dependency, my love as an annoyance. Now, you will have to stand on your own 2 feet. After I finished the letters, I put them in an envelope and left them on my coffee table, ready to be discovered. Then I sat in my living room, smiling. It had taken me 74 years, but I had finally learned the most important lesson of my life. You teach people how to treat you by what you are willing to accept. For decades, I accepted crumbs of love because I was afraid of being alone. But it turns out that being alone was infinitely better than being with people who didn't respect me. And now that I had learned that, I wasn't really alone at all. I was free. I was going to Nassau. And for the first time in a long, long time, I was excited about my life.